Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing amirc10 in the 15-minute pool on ICC. This player's 1932 and opens with e4. Let's play d6. We'll play a Pirc this time around. And let me have a look at their stats. 60 wins, 34 losses, 2 draws, peak rating of 2017. So I'll play knight f6 now. Unfortunately, we encountered a cheater in my last game in the 15-minute pool. So I'm hoping for a fair fight this time around. So I'll play e5 and offer a trade of pawns in the center. And this offers to go into an endgame, but I've looked at this endgame a little bit recently, and I think it's completely fine for black. Yeah, so bishop here, and usually black now goes bishop e6, so that if castle's queenside, we can hide the king on c8. So we're going to have a queenless middle game now. So I can play either knight bd7 or king c8 right away. I think I'll play knight bd7, just so that I might retain the option of going c6 and king c7. I don't think king c8 was a terrible decision if I wanted to play that way, but it might be better to do this. Okay, now I might have to play king c8, because otherwise knight takes e5 would be a threat. I could play bishop d6, but then knight b5 is an annoyance. So yes, let's go king c8 now and see how white reacts. One thing I found in studying this line is that white sometimes has difficulties when they're unable to get in a pawn break. You can see that they have a slight lead in development, and my king has been inconvenienced. But if there's no pawn break to open the position, then I don't think white has an edge. They can't exploit that lead in development in any meaningful way. So hence, a lot of players I've seen in this line will try to play for f4 instead of putting the knight on f3. They'll go for f4 and look to swap for that pawn on e5 instead. And I think the fact that white is pausing a little bit is maybe indicative of the fact that it's not easy to find a plan for white now. So look for me to move my queenside pawns at some stage. Like I may still play c6 and king c7 so I can connect my rooks. It's a little unclear where this bishop will go. Sometimes it goes to d6 to help e5. It may go to c5 to attack f2. Probably those squares are most likely. Maybe even bishop b4. So I could threaten to take the knight and then e4 be unprotected. We're just going to wait and see how white plays before we make our decision. White could take on f6 with their bishop. That would require me to respond with g takes f6, because note, if I took with my knight, I would lose the e5 pawn. But g takes f6 isn't bad. I'm willing to make that trade, accepting the doubled f pawns if I get the bishop pair. So bishop h4, probably looking to go knight g5, I'm guessing, with that move. So hence h6 immediately comes to mind. Prophylaxis against knight g5. My bishop is comfortable on e6. I don't think I want to disturb that situation. Just checking briefly if bishop b4 would make any sense, but knight g5, nah, I think it's worth preventing knight to g5. Maybe they're going to reposition the bishop on g3, so like if h6, bishop g3, but I can always play bishop d6 then. And then if knight b5, I have knight takes e4. So yeah, let's do this. I'm not sure taking on e5 is the best decision for white. Probably knight f3 on move 4 is a more critical theoretical test, but there will be a lot of players, if you play this line, who will just snatch the pawn on e5 and go into this ending, because they maybe automatically assume it's better for white, but I don't think that's the case at all. So what to do with this light square bishop? That's one issue white has to solve. I think bishop d3 is the most likely square. On e2, it wouldn't do much but block the e file, so I think bishop d3 is most likely. But then I can start playing some of those moves I mentioned, like maybe c6 or a6. Those will be good prophylactic moves to stop knight b5. Yeah, in particular, I think a6 is probably the way to go next, so I can safely put that bishop on d6. Bishop b5. So provoking me into even playing one of these moves. C6 or A6. I could also just ignore it and play bishop D6. That would be a neat reaction, I think. I'm surprised that they would want to entice me to play A6 or C6. So let's say I play A6. Bishop takes D7, knight takes D7, knight D5. I can even play F6 then. That's got to be somewhat better for black with the two bishops. So what if A6, bishop takes F6? Then just G takes F6, I think. Even knight takes F6 is fine there. Yeah, I don't quite understand. Maybe their idea is A6, bishop A4, followed by bishop B3. That could be it. A6, bishop A4. And if knight C5, there's still knight takes E5 to reckon with. Although then I could play knight takes A4, knight takes A4, knight takes E4. No, never mind. I would get mated on D8 in that line. So yes, that must be the plan. A6, bishop A4, followed by bishop to B3, looking to swap this bishop. So in that case, I'm kind of leaning towards bishop D6 now. To reinforce E5, complete my development, and maybe meet bishop A4 with knight C5. Excuse me. Yeah, let's do that. Then also my rook on H8 guards the D8 square, so there's no longer going to be a mate threat down there I have to worry about. I think this is a fine reaction by me. Maybe white will play knight D2, looking to get bishop C4 in. That's an alternative square that a swap could happen on. But I was thinking if knight D2, knight B6 might be a good response, covering C4. Okay, so they just play kind of a generic centralizing move. So now A6. I can't play C6. The bishop would be hanging on D6 if I did that, so maybe A6 now. This is one of these moves that looks correct, but I don't know will end up helping white too much. Kind of doubt it, actually. Yeah, let's play A6. Just see where white wants to put that bishop. Maybe they'll even go all the way back to F1, now that the rook is centralized. I think white should strive to keep the bishop pair. At least I would if I was white, so... Nope, they're going to go with this bishop A4 move, but now knight C5 is possible. And it looks like I'll get the bishop pair myself. So if knight C5, bishop takes F6, G takes F6, knight D5... Ah, no, that would just drop the bishop on A4. They can't do that. In that case, let's absolutely go for this. Try to snag that light square bishop. It's even slightly tempting to take with the bishop and then play my knight to E6, because it might have some good options on D4 or F4, but I think the bishop pair is
check
the most valuable thing, so let's do that. In some ways, this resembles like a Berlin defense. Just based on my king position, it kind of interferes with my rooks, but there's a lot of long-term factors going in my favor. Unlike the Berlin, though, I don't have structural problems to worry about, so that's really nice. Okay, so one thing I want to determine is if bishop takes F6, G takes F6, knight D5 is a threat. I'm a little worried about that, because that would attack the F6 pawn. And if I were to play F5 then, they could take and open the position to their favor. So you know what I'm thinking about here is knight H5. And maybe even trying to do exactly what you saw on the other wing, which is to win the bishop. So say I play knight H5, I'm actually gearing up for G5 in that case. It's kind of a cool plan. I don't exactly need the knight on F6. I mean, knight D5 is pretty harmless, I think. Knight H5, knight D5, maybe knight B6 is a threat? Yeah, it is a threat. So let's say knight H5, knight D5, G5. Knight B6 wouldn't work yet, so bishop G3. Knight takes G3, H takes G3. I could play like rook D8 in that case. I gotta believe that bishop pair is worth something. I could play something patient right now, but there really is that bishop takes f6 threat followed by knight d5 to worry about. That's the most pressing thing I can see. Maybe knight d7. So bring the knight to a different square. That way, if knight d5, I'm already guarding b6, so it wouldn't be as big of a deal. So I'm debating between knight d7 or knight h5. Let's look at knight h5 one more time. So knight h5, knight d5, g5, bishop g3. Knight takes g3, h takes g3. And then let's say rook d8, I think was the move I was considering. Maybe bishop c5 is also reasonable there. If knight takes e5, I can take on f2. Then again, I mean, how dangerous is this dark square bishop, really? I don't think that's a great piece for white. So maybe I just play knight d7 and say, I know you have a dark square bishop, but so what? Yeah, let's do that. The consequences of knight h5 are not clear to me after thinking for a couple minutes, so I think this move is fine, so we'll just go with it. So I might be looking to put the knight on c5 in the long run. I may also still play g5 if I want to gain some space on the king side and get rid of white's bishop on h4. And without any readily available pawn breaks, I still think this will be hard for white. There's not a lot of clear avenues for play. So on knight d5, I think b5 or rook e8 would be my answer. Probably rook e8 just to guard e7. But still look to play like b5 and king b7 in the near future. I don't know actually if I want to play g5 and kind of push the bishop back to g3 anyways. I might want to hold off on that. Whereas I think rook e8 is just useful in many respects. Potentially the pawn on e5 will be reinforced eventually. So look for black's long-term factors to become relevant in the next 5 to 10 moves. Like my bishop pair, perhaps my slightly more flexible pawn structure. White already has double pawns, so I think those are going to constitute a weakness. And I'm going to expand on the queen side, as I said, like moves like b5 and knight c5, maybe a5, a4 in the long run. White should probably play to change the pawn structure somehow. Like moving this knight and then playing f3 would make a lot of sense for white to try to get the bishop back to f2 and re-enter the game. But the thing is, like, where to put this knight. Like, d2 is probably the only logical square. Like, g1 doesn't look too appetizing. But after knight d2, I'm playing b5 and thereby stopping knight c4. So it doesn't have a lot of potential there, I don't believe. h3. I don't think that does a whole lot for white. Maybe some ambitions to play g4, g5, but as far as I can tell, I can just continue with my plan here. Go b5 and king b7 probably to come. This is just such a useful move, controlling c4. I could also take white's knight on d5 if they ever play knight d2, because they'd be unable to recapture with the rook. But I think I'd prefer to keep my bishop pair, everything else being equal. Yeah, I think it's almost unavoidable. I think white has to move this knight sometime soon. I just don't see what they're going to do otherwise. Like this plan of g4, g5 is not dangerous. Even if I gave white 2 moves to execute that plan, I could still play h5 and push past, or maybe even swipe the pawn on h3. So it probably just does more harm than good for white. And what else is there really to do? Like on the queen side, they don't want to poke their head out too much, because a move like c4 is going to weaken b3, and c4 doesn't even carry with it a threat. Maybe they can get their king up to c2, but it's really asking for knight c5. One thing I should keep in mind, though, is that if I play knight c5, like say I were to play knight c5 on the next move, knight b6 check is possible. And then I'd have to take with the pawn, because my knight is no longer here. And then they could play rook takes d6. So probably if I'm going to play knight c5, I need king b7 first to overprotect the b6 square and get out of a fork with knight b6. Yeah, white's starting to burn some time. I think there's a lot of value in learning an opening like this, where you propose an early queen trade. Because there's just so many players, especially from the white side, who will just automatically trade those queens and assume because they're white and they have a temper or two lead in development that they must be better. But if you've like deeply studied those middle games that can arise, you can have a pretty comfortable position going into these queenless middle games. Okay, so white comes up with a neat idea. I think they're going to try to play knight f5. So they've decided the knight is not good on d5. They're going to reroute it. So the first thing that jumps to mind is just g6 to stop knight f5. I'm also thinking, like, if knight f5 is played, if I don't play g6, then I can always play bishop f8 and just guard g7. I probably don't want to take on f5. I don't want to part with my light square bishop that easily. If g6, I weaken the f6 square, so I'd have to reckon with knight g4 maybe. It might be better just to avoid moving the g-pawn and just play king b7. There's even this plan of a5, a4 I kind of like, but I think I should connect my rooks. So let's say king b7, knight f5, bishop f8. Then I could always play g6 later, couldn't I? And the h6 pawn would be protected. I think I like the look of that best. So let's do it. There's no tactics. I see that white could spring on me, so I don't think I'm going to get surprised here. a5, a4 is a distinct possibility. If white starts playing predominantly on the king side, I may just spring this pawn break on him and open the queen side up at an unpleasant moment for white. I still haven't ruled out the possibility of the knight coming to c5 either. Now if c4 were to be played, knight c5 would fork these two pawns, wouldn't it? e4 and b3. Because this rook on e1 is not defending the e4 pawn anymore. I still very much like my position. I'm glad I didn't take that bishop with whatever I was looking at, knight h5 a little while ago, move 14. I ended up playing knight d7. I think that was a good call. It kept more tension in the position, and this bishop has not proved to be an important player in the game as of yet. And this knight's flexible. So white will be under 5 minutes very soon. This bodes well for me. All right, so let's play this as planned and ask white how they're going to proceed. Bishop g3 could be played to attack e5. In that case, I would probably play f6, reinforcing. Or maybe g6 first. Rook d3. Strange. So they're saying bring it on with knight c5. So if I play knight c5, where are you going with that rook? One idea that might be playable is like knight c5 and then taking on e4 to remove the guard of the knight. But I kind of think I should play f6, either now or very soon, just to reinforce e5. Because I get the feeling white's preparing to double up their rooks. So playing f6 so that I can play knight c5 without any hesitation looks good. Let's do that. I'm also arranging some more pawns on light squares to keep this bishop out of the game. White could maybe try to play b4 right here. Idea being that if bishop takes b4, the pawn on g7 hangs. Not sure that even works tactically for them, because their rook on e1 would be under attack, but b4, bishop takes b4, knight takes g7, bishop takes e1, knight takes e8. Probably actually does work for them. Okay, so they're going to move the knight. Maybe they're going to swing the rook along the third rank to like f3, perhaps? But now I'm really looking at knight c5. Because rook g3 would just result in their bishop being trapped on h4 after g5. Yeah, let's go knight c5. I'm not going to resist this move any longer. And then knight takes e4 is hanging in the air too, just removing that defender as I was describing. Ooh, g6 as well. g6 basically traps their knight, doesn't it? Because if g6, knight g3, I get in g5. Huh. g6, bishop takes f6, g takes f5, e takes f5, bishop takes f5, rook takes e5, rook takes e5. I think I'm coming out just a piece ahead there for 2 pawns. Yeah, I think I am. So if g6, what if they play b4? Knight d7 even? Yeah, they've just taken away the flight squares from that knight. Like the one flight square that was safe, e3, is now not possible for them. And if knight g3, g5, as I was saying. So I think they have to play bishop takes f6 now and hope for the best. Yeah, even this move, I think just knight d7. And that's even better for me because now I defend f6 as well. So I don't even need to look into moves like g takes f5, b takes c5, f4, stuff like that. I don't think is necessary. And that is a trap piece. Yeah, I believe they really had to play bishop takes f6 on the previous move, and white resigns now. Okay, so I think this victory highlights some of the virtues of this line. This Pirc with an early e5, transposing it into a Philidor. So let's go back and take a look. So knight f3, I believe, is the strongest reaction here. I think white should keep the tension and just be content with their pawn duo in the center and play from there. There's a lot of theory attached to that. Black can go knight bd7 and defend the e5 pawn. I actually had a game like that from the white side recently against Viper Boy, I believe was the opponent.
Check.
So white goes into this endgame, but as I said, this is an endgame that gives black plenty of decent play, and just because white's a little ahead in development, it doesn't mean much, because when the queens get traded, the game tends to slow down significantly. So yeah, white castles with check. I played knight bd7. Let's start up the engine right here. Thinking that even the engine is going to give an advantage to white initially, but expect that to drop. Yeah, and the engine's top move is f4, because white should make a real strong effort right away to open the position. So let's say I take. If e5, trying to exploit the pin here, I can play h6. Note that knight takes e5 is illegal. There's a pin. So I can play h6, and then after like bishop h4, probably g5, take. This is messy, but probably fine for black. Here also I have the 2 bishops, and I'm temporarily up a pawn. But white should think about ways to organize an early f4. Like this move, knight f3, despite being well-intentioned and perfectly in keeping with opening principles, I think if you make too many of these types of moves, you're going to find yourself lacking a plan in another 5 moves, as happened in the game. Yeah, so here king c8 just sidesteps the threat of knight takes e5. White played bishop h4. That was an interesting move because it does free up this and maybe allows for bishop g3. So I just covered the g5 square. And the engine says white should play bishop g3 right away. Now I was just going to play that against this move. with the point being that he can't harass me with knight b5 because I can take on e4 and simultaneously defend the bishop, and win a pawn. Yeah, and this looks dubious, bishop b5. The idea of bishop a4 to b3 never properly panned out for white. I kind of see their point, like why they're trying to induce this, but I don't really believe in it. So I played bishop d6 now. The engine prefers this, so what if bishop a4, bishop b4, try to fight back and threaten bishop takes c3 followed by taking here? Yeah, that's a good point. I was content to play bishop d6 and just keep the pawn on e5 overprotected and allow my rook to communicate with the d8 square. Yeah, and I really think moves like what white played next, like rook he1. For you stronger players watching this video, these are the type of moves you want to eliminate from your games. Because it's so easy to just quickly justify a move like that. You're like, oh, rook moves to the center, developing my last piece. What about this move can possibly be incorrect? So you just play it. But after you play that move, if you don't have a plan in mind, I would argue that the original rook move was just bad. White has to find something a little more concrete here. It may not quite exist, but like a move like rook he1 is just going to shoot you in the foot because you're not going to have a plan coming up. Rook he1, yeah, you're getting the rook to an open file, but you don't need the extra protection here. You really need to organize a pawn break or somehow reposition your minor pieces. That's why I kept mentioning stuff like knight d2, trying to go like bishop c4, or maybe play f3 and bishop f2. Something about the structure needs to be tweaked a bit if white wants to get proper play here. These moves play into black's hands. So I played a6. Yeah, now I had a feeling maybe white should even play the bishop all the way back to f1. I think black is still very comfortable, but I would preserve that bishop pair if I were white, so they can fight back on the light squares. Bishop a4 just runs straight into knight c5, and now I'm going to take the bishop pair. So the engine is saying bishop takes f6, g takes f6, bishop b3,
Check.
take with the c pawn. And it still gives an edge to black, although maybe white can try to go knight d5 and attack this f6 pawn. That's one possibility that concerned me in the game, so I mentioned that a couple times. But they just played bishop b3 straight away.
Check.
And here I had a debate about knight h5 versus knight d7. The engine thinks both are fine. It was giving knight d7 as its main move, but it also thinks this is okay. So knight d5 was my concern about that, and the fact that I don't cover b6 too well is why I ultimately rejected this. I was looking at a line like g5, bishop g3, take the bishop pair, and then play rook d8, I think was the move I was looking at. But there might be some tactical issues. Rook h1 going after the h-pawn looks pretty good. And then if bishop f8 to cover, I lose the e5 pawn. There also might even be knight takes e5 right away, huh? Because then, if I take the knight, check this out. Knight e7, king has to go to b8, and then they win the rook in the game. White's up material. Yeah, so good thing I rejected knight h5. Knight d7 is flexible, and it has the big benefit of covering b6. Yep, and you can see the eval is just already in black's favor. It's creeping up towards half a pawn. That's a reflection on the bishop pair, black's slightly better pawn structure, and the fact that white doesn't have a good plan. Yeah, I agree about knight d2, though. The engine is giving that as the best move. I think white has to play a repositioning of that knight. They tried to do that in the game, but it was too late when they did it. So at least trying to get in knight c4, or maybe playing f3 and bishop back to f2. The bishop would be much better on this diagonal than it is on h4. So instead, knight d5 was played. I played rook e8. Computers thinks that g5 is slightly stronger. g5, bishop g3, and then f6. Setting up a pawn barricade once again. So rook e8, h3. Another one of those moves that I don't think helps white all that much. So I just played b5 and gained space. a5 also comes to mind. Trying to go a4. This is one plan that I talked about but never had to revert to in the game. Or even wanted to revert to because white's pieces just got so tangled in the center. So knight back to e3. So here white indicated that they weren't happy with their knight on d5, and Instead thought that the f5 square was more promising. But I just continued as planned. King b7. Now the rooks are talking to each other. Knight f5, and even though I could take and give white double pawns, my light square bishop is more valuable than that. And I don't want to open the e-file unnecessarily. So hence bishop f8 is good. And this knight is outposted, but it's no different than the knight being on d5. All I have to do is control what this knight can attack. And the knight itself being on my 5th rank is not that big of a deal. And I like the fact that I could always play g6 whenever I want, and the bishop on f8 would cover that pawn. And here white started going astray. Yeah, rook d3 doesn't help much, does it? But still, it's already pretty comfortable for black. We're gradually gaining in the evaluation department. So the engine says bishop g3 attacking e5 again. g6 kicking out the knight, knight e3. Bishop back to d6 to guard this. Knight g4, f6. Knight takes h6, and then a5, so just give up the h-pawn. I probably wouldn't have done that. But I think the computer wants to go for a queenside attack now that white's a little bit distracted on the king side. On bishop g3, I might have played f6, although I think maybe an idea is this, to try to get into g6. Because when I move these kingside pawns, I do leave some weak squares in their wake. The g6 seems pretty decent. Yeah, this would at least create some issues. Like now I'm actually having to pause and think about how I want to defend some of these weak squares and this pawn on e5. Maybe bishop g7. And if here, now f6, and even though my bishop looks kind of ridiculous on g7, at least I'm guarding everything and I can slowly push white back. h5 coming up next. That looks like something more in keeping with what I would do. Rook d3 is too awkward, and it's giving me motivation to play knight c5 with tempo, so I really don't think that move is a good move. I played f6. Looks all right. I just want to make sure this pawn's defended when I move this knight. Knight d2. Knight c5. g6 is also strong right away. Yeah, I didn't play it because I thought knight e3 would be okay. Oh, am I trapping the rook now, though? Looks like I am. Yeah, this rook is running out of good squares. It can't go this way anymore. And if here I have b4, right? So white might have to sacrifice the exchange. Bishop takes f6 and
Check.
try to play this position. That should be bad, though. So even knight c5 right away is strong. Or, sorry, g6 right away is strong. But I played knight c5. Yep, and then they ran into g6. But in fact, white doesn't have a lot of good alternatives, do they? Because rook g3 is going to blunder the bishop, g5. Maybe rook f3 is forced. Yeah, that's probably the case. So they keep the e3 square available for the knight to retreat. In here, maybe I would go for that queenside plan. Maybe I would just say, okay, I've got everything covered on the king side. As long as g7 is protected, what is white really going to do to me? So b4 and then go a5, a4 and get ready to party on this wing. I like b4. I like prefacing that with b4 because otherwise white might play b4 themselves. Like if I play a5, a4, maybe then they'll play b4 and try to keep the position closed down. So that's a good move the computer is recommending. Yeah, black just has a total free hand on the queen side. And it's hard for white to continue generating threats on the king side. They've kind of maxed that out over there. Because always rook g3 trying to attack g7 is just going to run into that move. But as played, rook e3 and now g6, and I think white just has to sacrifice the piece somehow. Yeah, because b4, knight d7, and now I even covered the f6 pawn, and this is just losing a piece, so white resigned. Didn't wait around for this to happen. I thought the best way to sack the piece was taking on f6, trying for this sort of thing. When they do get two pawns, although I see the computer recommends the clever move knight d7 even here. So before gathering the knight on f5, just casually retreat this and guard e5. And still both these pieces are under attack. If bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, white has two pawns, but these two pawns are not as valuable because the position isn't open, and I have a dark square bishop that can be pretty fearsome, maybe coming out to c5 soon. But I think white realized that they had messed up, so they just tried to counterattack, and after it failed, they just gave up. So if you like playing endgames and want to improve your technical skills in chess, I think this is not a bad line to play. And e4, d6, knight f6, followed by e5 is a good move order to get into this. It's kind of like you're trying to back into a Philidor, but you're giving white this very tempting option of trading queens, which, maybe white can play for an edge here, but I just haven't seen too many games where black has problems in this ending. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this game, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.